The car didn't slow when I pressed the brake. At first, my mind refused to accept it. I pressed again, harder. Nothing. The road curved ahead, sharp and unforgiving, and the realization slid into place with terrifying calm.
Julian.
The thought came fully formed, cold and certain. He'd been angry that morning.
Too calm.
Too controlled. He'd kissed my forehead and told me to take the long way home, said I needed the air. The car veered. The world tilted. I remember sound more than impact. Metal screaming, glass shattering. My own breath ripped from my chest. Then silence. Heavy. Pressing. I don't know how long I lay there before I moved. Pain existed, but it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that I was alive, and that I finally understood something I'd spent years refusing to see. Julian had never loved me. He had curated me. I crawled out of the wreckage slowly, every movement deliberate. The ravine smelled like dirt and broken leaves. My hands were shaking, but my mind was frighteningly clear. He didn't want me dead. He wanted me afraid. That was the moment I was reborn, not dramatic, not emotional. Metallic. Precise. By the time I made it home hours later, cleaned up and stitched together by strangers who didn't ask questions, the house was blazing with light and laughter. Music drifted through the open doors. I stepped inside. A dinner party. My dinner party. The table was full. Strangers, familiar faces, cameras already out. Julian sat at the head like a king. And in my chair, my seat, sat a girl barely old enough to hide her ambition.
Bella.
She wore my pearls. Julian looked up and laughed when he saw me. There she is, he said loudly. Ilera had a little accident today. She's been unstable. A ripple of awkward laughter followed. Bella smiled nervously, touching the pearls. I hope you don't mind, she said. Julian said I should sit here. I didn't look at her. I looked at him. You sabotaged my car, I said quietly. Julian stood, shaking his head, smiling indulgently.
See, he said to the guests.
Delusions. Trauma does that. Then his eyes dropped to the faint marks on my arms, the stiffness in my posture. Careful, he added lightly. Those scars aren't very flattering. Maybe let Bella handle things for now. She's the real brains. The room went silent. Something inside me locked into place. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. And in that moment, I decided Julian Vane would lose everything he'd built on my silence. The ravine hadn't killed me, but it had stripped me down to something he'd never survive. The air in my own home smelled different after the crash. Sharp. Electric. Like it had been waiting for me to return, fully aware of what had happened. I moved through the laughter and clinking glasses, every step measured, every eye on me feeling like a challenge. Julian froze slightly, his practiced charm faltering for the first time. He glanced at Bella, who blinked nervously, gripping my pearls as if they could shield her from what was coming. I stopped just short of the table. The guests sat rigidly, sensing that the entertainment had arrived, the storm they hadn't anticipated. Julian's smirk was quick to return, polished and theatrical, but it didn't reach his eyes. You know, I said softly, letting my voice carry across the room, people usually don't announce themselves as thieves and liars in front of witnesses. But here you are. Julian leaned back, dismissive, as if humor could mask the tremor I thought I saw in his jaw. Ilera, he said smoothly, you've always overdramatized. Surely surviving a minor accident doesn't mean you're suddenly the hero of a story. I survived because I didn't need anyone to save me, I replied, voice cold measured. And I've been waiting for the right moment to make certain everyone else knows it. The guests exchanged glances, uncomfortable but curious. Bella's grip on the pearls tightened. I could almost feel her realizing she'd been a prop in someone else's twisted game. I assume you're wondering why I'm here, I continued, stepping closer to the table. It's not about forgiveness. It's not about confrontation. It's about reclamation. You see, Julian, the truth has a way of catching up. And I'm the one holding it now. Julian's smirk flickered. You think you can? I don't think, I interrupted, letting a sharp glance sweep the room. I know. Every signature dish you've paraded as your genius, every accolade you collected while belittling me, belongs to me. And now the world is about to see that. A hush fell over the room. Bella's lips parted, caught somewhere between embarrassment and horror. Julian's color shifted slightly, a subtle pale creeping along his temples. You can't prove anything, he said finally, trying to regain authority, trying to stand tall. I already have, I said, my hand brushing a hidden folder in my bag that held the evidence. Photographs, recipes, notes, and confessions he had never thought I'd keep. And I've brought someone who knows how to make the world listen. I saw the shift before the introduction even came. Julian's control was slipping. His guests were no longer laughing at my delusions. They were listening, observing, watching. The storm I had carried since the ravine finally hit the table, quietly, deliberately, irreversibly. And I had only just begun. I had known Caspian Reed long before Julian had the audacity to claim he was my mentor's mentor. Cold, ruthless, brilliant. The kind of critic whose pen could reduce an empire to ashes, or build one in its place. And now he was my ally. When I stepped back into my kitchen later that evening, after the guests had left in a daze, Caspian was already waiting, a glass of dark amber liquid in his hand, his eyes sharp and calculating. You brought me drama, he said casually, though his tone held an edge. I prefer substance. I'm offering both, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. He's arrogant, careless, and convinced that charm can replace talent. He's been passing off my recipes for years. Caspian raised an eyebrow. Ah, the famous Julian Vane facade. I've smelled it before, but never tasted the truth. Then taste it now, I said. Every dish, every menu, every accolade, it's mine. He built a career on my work, on my ideas, and now I want him exposed. He studied me, silent for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because I don't publish half-truths. If we do this, it will be surgical. I felt the first flicker of satisfaction. Not gloating, not revenge for revenge's sake. Just cold precision, the way the ravine had changed me. Survival wasn't emotional. Survival was methodical. I need the world to see the difference between a man who steals and a woman who builds, I said quietly. And I need someone who can make sure they listen. Caspian smiled slightly, the first warmth I'd seen from him. You've already done most of the work. I just make the conclusion inevitable. Expose the fraud. Cement the truth. And when the world sees Julian Vane as a copycat, the legacy you've earned, untouchable. I leaned against the counter, feeling my pulse finally slow. The metallic edge I had carried since the ravine softened slightly, just enough for the tiniest sense of victory. Tonight was only the beginning, I said. He thinks he's untouchable. That laughter, the pearls, the public spectacle, he's blind. But I've been alive under the weight of metal and fear. That fear? It's mine now. I'll decide how it's used. Caspian nodded, finishing his drink. Good. Let him crumble quietly, painfully. Let the world whisper as his empire falls. You've already survived what most would die for. Now, it's time the rest of them survive your success. I straightened, resolve hardening again. Julian had underestimated me from the very start. He thought a car crash would silence me. He thought scars made me fragile.
He thought I'd bend.
But here I was.
Alive. Scarred.
Calculating. And utterly unstoppable. And as Caspian and I walked through the empty dining room, I realized something else, too. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a game I intended to win. The morning after I brought Caspian into my world, the kitchen felt different. Cold sunlight slanted across the counters, cutting through the lingering warmth of last night's tension. Every utensil, every plate, every detail reminded me of the life Julian had tried to steal, and how carefully I was going to take it back. Caspian arrived with a folder clutched under his arm, his expression unreadable. I've drafted the first piece, he said quietly, setting it on the counter. It's sharp, clean. He won't see it coming until the world has read it. I studied the pages, each sentence precise and damning. He didn't sensationalize. He didn't exaggerate. He exposed facts, my recipes, his lies, his theft, and the evidence he could never deny. "This is perfect," I whispered, letting a small, controlled smile form. "He will crumble." Caspian's eyes flicked to mine, sharp and assessing. "You're calm," he noted. "That calm isn't weakness." "No," I said. "It's preparation." The ravine taught me one thing. Panic is wasted energy. Planning wins every time. By noon, the first whispers of the exposé were circulating. A small leak through industry channels, enough to make Julian's closest contacts murmur, question, and doubt. I watched from my kitchen window as his social media feeds began to fill with subtle hints of scrutiny. He called me later that afternoon. Julian's voice, usually smooth and commanding, trembled slightly. "Elara, I don't understand. People are talking. They're questioning." I cut him off, calm and icy. "You built a career on my work, Julian. Every accolade, every signature dish, every whisper of your genius, that's mine. And now the world knows." There was a pause. I could hear the denial forming, but it faltered under the weight of truth. "You think this is over?" he spat finally. "You can't." "I can," I said. "And I will. Every step, every dish, every menu, everything you thought was untouchable, already slipping from your grasp." By the time he hung up, I felt the familiar rush, not relief, not victory, but the satisfaction of control. Julian had underestimated the precision that comes from surviving when you should have died. Later, Caspian and I went through the feedback from industry insiders. Comments, emails, and private messages flowed in, people asking, questioning, connecting the dots. He leaned back, finally allowing the smallest smirk.
"He's scared," he said.
I nodded, sipping my coffee. Not scared enough to admit it. That will come. And when it does, it will be quiet. Painful. I like it that way. For the first time since the crash, I felt a strange clarity. This wasn't just revenge. It was reclamation. Julian had tried to define me by fear, by control, by his lies. Now, I was defining myself by the exact opposite: precision, truth, and unwavering resolve. And as I glanced out the window at the city below, I realized he had no idea how unstoppable I had become. The morning of the exposé's release, I woke with a strange calm I hadn't felt in years. No panic, no fear, only focus. I dressed carefully, slipping into the clothes I liked best, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I controlled every detail of my life now. Caspian arrived with his usual quiet precision, folder in hand, laptop open, eyes scanning every possible angle. "Timing is everything," he said. "Once this goes public, there's no turning back." I nodded. "I know. And that's exactly how it should be." The moment the article went live, the world shifted. Social media buzzed immediately. Chefs, food bloggers, journalists, and industry insiders reposting, questioning, dissecting every detail. Julian's phone began ringing before the first hour ended, though he didn't answer. By mid-afternoon, I received messages from friends and colleagues, all shocked and incredulous at the revelations. Every whisper of doubt he had carefully cultivated crumbled under the weight of facts. Photographs of my handwritten recipes, timestamps on dishes I had created years before Julian had claimed credit, emails proving he had presented my work as his own. It was all there, undeniable. And then came the best part. Julian's first public statement, delivered through a carefully staged video, attempting to deny, to charm, to salvage a reputation that was already unraveling. I watched it with a sense of detached satisfaction, noting the cracks in his voice, the subtle tremor in his hands. The audience saw it too. The world was no longer laughing at me, they were laughing at him. Bella, the young blogger who had sat in my chair like a placeholder for Julian's ego, called. I didn't realize," she said, voice shaky. "I didn't know." "It's fine," I said, calm but firm. "What matters is that you see the truth now. and you'll never sit in someone else's seat again without knowing who really owns the work. Caspian placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. The final stage isn't revenge, he said. It's dominance. He loses because the world now knows the truth. Not because of anger, but because of skill and evidence. You've done this flawlessly. I smiled faintly. And I've survived everything to get here. The crash. The betrayal. The public spectacle. Now he's the one in pieces. That evening, I walked into my newly renovated restaurant, a space I had designed from scratch, my own name on the sign, my own reputation fully intact. Guests came, curious, eager, excited to taste the work I had always created but never claimed. I stood behind the counter with Caspian beside me, watching the joy on their faces. And I realized something. The fire of betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had become the engine of my rebirth. Julian could have ended me, or at least tried, but instead, he forged the person I had become. I didn't need to hate him anymore. I didn't need to fear him. All I needed was precision, focus, and the unshakable knowledge that I would always survive and thrive. And as Caspian caught my gaze, there was something in the way he smiled, quiet, approving, and undeniably loyal, that reminded me. Some partnerships were built not on control, but on respect, trust, and shared strength. I was alive. I was unstoppable. And the world was finally mine. By the next morning, the fallout from the exposé had reached every corner of the culinary world. Industry insiders were whispering, critics were analyzing every past event, and Julian's carefully constructed empire was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. His calls came incessantly. I didn't answer a single one. His emails, full of threats thinly veiled as apologies, were deleted unread. He had assumed that fear, charm, or guilt could manipulate me, but he had never met the Alara Vance who survived a high-speed crash into a ravine. Caspian, predictably, was calm. He'll make one last attempt, he said, standing over my laptop as I monitored the responses to the exposé. Panic, arrogance, and ego. He can't resist the spotlight. I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. Let him come. Every move he makes just proves the point. Hours later, the first tangible strike arrived. Julian had booked a private tasting at a prestigious food festival, the kind of event where reputation is everything. He planned to unveil a new signature menu in a desperate attempt to reclaim attention, to assert dominance. Caspian's eyes glimmered with amusement. This is perfect, he said. We'll attend, witness it, and dismantle it quietly with evidence. The night of the festival, I stood beside him in the grand hall, calm and composed. Julian entered, all charm and theatrics, unaware that the room was subtly shifting against him. Industry veterans, critics, and influencers, all familiar with the exposé, watched, skeptical, already primed. When the first dish arrived, Julian's trembling hands betrayed him. Every presentation that had once been hailed as genius was scrutinized. Murmurs spread. Questions were asked. And I watched, quietly satisfied, as the man who had once controlled my world lost command of his own. Caspian leaned close, voice low. He underestimated your precision. That's why he fails. I nodded, feeling a rare warmth that wasn't fear or anger. It's not just precision. It's survival. He's only ever faced the version of me who bends. He hasn't met the one who fights methodically. The night ended quietly, with Julian retreating, humiliated, and his attempts at charm dissolved under the weight of proof. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting. Just cold, undeniable facts, leaving him exposed. As we walked out into the night, the cool air carrying the scent of rain and city streets, Caspian placed his hand briefly on my elbow. Not possessive, but grounding. You handled that beautifully, he said. Not with anger, but with strategy. I looked at him, the first real connection forming between us outside of mutual purpose. I've learned who I am, I admitted. And now I don't just survive, I decide how to live. He smiled faintly, and I intend to be part of that life. Not because I saved you, but because you earned it. Every step of the way. For the first time in years, I felt the possibility of something more. Not a replacement for the past, but a partnership grounded in respect, shared goals, and mutual strength. Julian was gone. My world was mine. And for the first time, I could look ahead without fear. The morning after Julian's last desperate act, the silence in my restaurant felt sacred. The air smelled like fresh bread and possibility, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension I had lived under for years. Every detail of this space was mine. Every counter, every display, every plate reflected not just my skill, but my autonomy. Caspian arrived early, as usual, carrying a small notebook and a coffee for me. His presence was grounding, a reminder that while I had fought and won, I wasn't alone in shaping the next chapter of my life. "Are you ready?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "To take this fully public?" I nodded, feeling the thrill of possibility. I've survived betrayal, crashes, humiliation. The next step is mine to define. We spent the day coordinating press, social media releases, and private tastings for industry insiders. But unlike Julian, I was calm, measured, precise, in control. There was no desperate need for approval, no fear of scrutiny. I had earned it. Every signature dish was mine. Every smile from the guests a quiet victory. Caspian watched me closely, noting every gesture, every interaction. "You don't just run a restaurant," he said quietly. "You command it."
People sense it.
"That's rare." "I've learned command comes from clarity," I said, glancing at him. "Not charm, not theatrics. Just knowing what I want and not letting anyone take it from me." He smiled faintly, and there it was, a softness I hadn't expected. I've watched a lot of people lose themselves to fear or ambition. You survive and you thrive. That's magnetic. I felt something warm in my chest. Not the reckless heat of desire, but a steady ember of trust. Someone who respected my scars, my victories, my strategy, and still chose to stand beside me. The day wore on, and my empire began to take shape. Reservations filled quickly, press coverage expanded, and whispers of Julian's downfall reached every corner of the culinary world. Each acknowledgement, each nod to my skill, felt like reclamation. This wasn't just revenge, it was creation. Later, as the evening settled and the last of the guests left, I found myself standing beside Caspian on the balcony, the city lights sparkling like a reflection of the life I had built. "You've done this beautifully," he said, voice low. "Not because of me, but because of who you are." "I couldn't have done it alone," I admitted. "But I also couldn't have done it for him." He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. It was tentative, careful, a gesture of respect rather than possession. "Then we do it together," he said. "You build, I support. No illusions, no ego, just truth and precision." I nodded, realizing I didn't want more than that. Not control, not power over someone else, just a partnership of equals, someone who matched my pace, my clarity, and my resolve. As the night deepened, I felt it fully. The world was mine, Julian's shadow gone, and the future, a life of creation, strategy, and careful passion, was finally something I could embrace. I had survived everything, and now I was free to thrive. By the time the week had ended, the world had fully shifted. Julian's name was a whisper, a cautionary tale of arrogance and theft. My restaurant thrived. The press couldn't stop praising the authenticity and brilliance of my vision. Each review was a victory, each reservation a reminder that I had taken back everything he had tried to steal from me. Caspian and I stood side by side in the quiet of the dining room, the last of the evening's guests long gone. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, but his eyes were fixed on me with a warmth that made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt in years. "You've built more than a restaurant," he said softly. "You've built a life, a legacy, and you did it on your terms." I smiled, stepping closer. "It feels right. For the first time, everything is mine, but it isn't empty. It's full of proof that I survived, and full of people who believe in what I've created." Caspian's hand brushed mine, tentative at first, then firmer, lacing our fingers together. And now, he said, his voice low, you don't have to do it alone. I want to be part of this. Every challenge, every triumph, every quiet moment in between. I felt a shiver run through me, not from the touch, but from the weight of trust and understanding. You mean it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I do, he said, stepping closer so our foreheads nearly touched. I've always believed in the truth, and I've never met someone who could wield it as beautifully as you do. I want to stand beside you, not in front, not behind, but together. The intensity of his gaze made my breath catch. After years of betrayal, after near-death experiences and public humiliation, this, Caspian, was a haven I hadn't dared to imagine. And yet it was real. I tilted my head, letting our hands intertwine fully. Then let's do it, I said.
Together.
He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, the kind that promises safety without smothering, partnership without ego. Together, he echoed. Later, as we walked through the empty streets, the city lights reflecting in the glass windows around us, I realized the full scope of what had changed. Julian's shadow was gone. The scars I carried were no longer chains. They were proof of endurance, reminders of everything I had survived. And, beside me, Caspian was more than a partner in strategy.
He was a partner in life.
Not possessive, not controlling, just steady, loyal, and utterly devoted. I rested my hand on his arm, letting the warmth of his presence seep into me. I never thought I'd feel safe again, I admitted. You are, he said softly, and you always will be, because you've earned it, and now we protect each other. For the first time in years, I smiled without restraint. I had been reborn in fire, betrayal, and near death. I had reclaimed everything stolen from me. And now I wasn't just surviving. I was building a future filled with truth, love, and a partnership that could weather anything. The world was ours, and for the first time, I knew I was exactly where I belonged.